My name is Clara Bennett. I am 31 years old, and 7 years ago, I stood perfectly still in my grandmother's living room in a quiet neighborhood in Ashford Heights and watched my own family erase my future without using a single flame, because they didn't need fire. They used something far colder: signatures, silence, and carefully crafted lies. And I remember that moment with a clarity that still tightens my chest even now. My uncle Victor stood in the center of the room holding a folder like it was something he had been waiting his whole life to use. My Aunt Marlene stood just behind him with her fingers wrapped tightly around my grandmother's pearl necklace, the same necklace she had once promised she would never touch. And my cousins stood near the doorway watching me with that quiet look people give when they have already decided you don't belong. And then Victor spoke, calm, controlled, almost bored, as if what he was about to say meant nothing at all. He said, "I was not in the will," just like that. No hesitation, no explanation, no emotion, and I didn't speak. I didn't move, because something deep inside me already knew that wasn't the truth. But I had spent years in that house learning one very important rule: if you show emotion, they will use it against you. So I stayed quiet while he continued flipping through the pages slowly like he was enjoying every second of it, telling me the house, the land, the accounts, everything had been left to them. And then he looked up at me and smiled in a way that felt colder than anger and said I would get nothing. And the word nothing didn't sound like a word. It felt like something heavy dropping straight through my chest, final and absolute. And still I didn't react because I knew reacting would only give them exactly what they wanted. Marlene stepped forward then and spoke softly, gently, in that careful voice she used when she wanted to sound kind without actually being kind. She said it was what my grandmother wanted, and that was the moment something inside me cracked, not loudly, not in a way anyone else could see, but in a way I felt all the way down to my bones, because I knew my grandmother. I knew the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I knew the quiet way she would reach for my hand without saying a word. I knew the way she loved without needing to prove it, and I knew she would never leave me with nothing. But in that room I had no proof, no voice, no power. Just their version of the truth being spoken over me, until it became the only thing anyone was willing to hear. Victor closed the folder and tapped it lightly against his hand like the conversation was already over, and told me I had until the end of the day to pack my things. No discussion, no space to question anything, just a decision made about my life without me. And if you are listening right now, I want you to ask yourself something honestly. What would you do if the people who raised you looked you in the eye and told you that you were never really part of the family? Would you fight? Would you beg? Or would you do what I did and say nothing because deep down you already knew they had been waiting for this moment all along? I turned and walked upstairs slowly, each step heavier than the last, but my face stayed calm because if they saw me break they would win. And when I stepped into my room, everything looked exactly the same. The same bed, the same window, the same small desk where my grandmother used to sit with me and tell stories late at night. And for just a second I almost believed nothing had changed, but then I looked at myself in the mirror, and I saw it. Not tears, not anger, just something colder, something clearer. And in that moment I understood something they never expected me to realize. They didn't just want the house, they didn't just want the money, they wanted to remove me completely. Because as long as I was there, I was a reminder of something they couldn't control, something they couldn't rewrite, and that made me dangerous. So I didn't go back downstairs. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I knew they would never answer. Instead, I opened my closet and started packing quietly. Not memories, not keepsakes, just what I needed to leave. Because sometimes walking away is not weakness. Sometimes it's the first move in a much bigger story. And before I tell you how I walked out of that house that night with nothing in my hands but something they never knew I had, you need to understand this is not just a story about inheritance. This is a family secret story. A story about betrayal, about greedy relatives, about the truth being buried so deep it took 7 years to surface. And when it finally did, it didn't just change my life, it destroyed everything they thought they had protected. So if you believe that people who lie, manipulate, and betray their own family will eventually face the truth, stay with me, because what happened next is something none of them saw coming. Not Victor, not Marlene, and not even me. My name is Clara Bennett, and I am 31 years old. 7 years ago, I stood outside the front gate of my grandmother's house in the pouring rain, holding one suitcase, one cracked phone, and one truth nobody in my family wanted me to know. My grandmother, Eleanor Bennett, had died 3 days earlier, and before her body was even laid to rest, my relatives had already started dividing her furniture, her jewelry, her bank accounts, and her land like hungry strangers at an auction. But the cruelest part was not that they took everything. The cruelest part was that they looked me in the eye and told me I had never been family at all. My uncle Victor stood on the porch with my Aunt Marlene beside him, both dressed in black, both pretending to grieve, while my cousins laughed quietly behind them. Victor held up a folder and said, "Your grandmother left you nothing, Clara. Not $1, not one chair, not one memory. You were only here because she felt sorry for you." I remember the rain running down my face, but I did not know if I was crying. I only remember looking past him into the warm yellow light of the house where my grandmother had raised me, the house where she taught me how to make soup when I was sick, how to pray when I was scared, how to stand up straight even when people tried to break me. Then Victor stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Leave before we call the police." That was the night my family secret story began. And before I tell you how I came back 7 years later, sitting across from them in a lawyer's office with a sealed envelope that destroyed their perfect lies, please stay with me, because this is not just a family inheritance drama. This is a story about family betrayal, greedy relatives, family secrets revealed, and the quiet power of a woman who stopped begging to be loved by people who only loved what they could take from her. I was not born into a rich life, but I was raised around one. My grandmother Eleanor owned 3 small apartment buildings, 2 pieces of farmland, and the old Bennett house at the edge of Ashford Heights. To outsiders, our family looked respectable. My uncle Victor was a real estate agent who wore expensive watches he could not afford. My Aunt Marlene ran charity luncheons where she smiled for photos and spoke about kindness. My cousins, Rachel and Dean, posted online about legacy, loyalty, and family values. But inside that house, everything was different. My grandmother saw what others refused to see. She knew Victor visited only when he needed money. She knew Marlene borrowed jewelry and forgot to return it. She knew Rachel treated waiters like servants, and Dean gambled away more than he admitted. And she knew I was the only one who came without asking for anything. I was the daughter of Eleanor's youngest son, Michael Bennett, a man my relatives hated because he married my mother against their wishes. When my parents died in a car accident when I was 9, Grandma took me in. Victor never forgave her for that. He believed every dollar spent on me was stolen from his children. So I grew up in that house, loved deeply by one woman and quietly hated by everyone else. Grandma would brush my hair at night and whisper, "Clara, never confuse blood with love. Some people share your name but not your heart." I did not understand then. I understand now. If you are listening and you have ever felt like the unwanted one in your own family, please write in the comments where you are watching from. Sometimes one honest comment can make another person feel less alone. When Grandma got sick, the vultures came early. Victor started visiting every evening with papers in his briefcase. Marlene began taking inventory of the silverware. Rachel measured the upstairs bedrooms, saying she wanted to preserve family history, but I knew she was already imagining herself living there. Grandma was weak, but her mind was sharp. One afternoon, she held my hand and said, "Clara, if anything happens, do not believe the first story they tell you." I asked her what she meant, but she only looked toward the hallway and squeezed my fingers. 2 nights later, I heard Victor arguing with her behind the study door. He said, "You cannot leave anything to that girl. She is not one of us." Grandma's voice was tired but clear. "She is more family to me than any of you." After that, everything changed. Victor stopped letting me sit alone with her. Marlene told the nurse I was making Grandma anxious. Rachel moved into the guest room and began controlling who entered the house. The day Grandma died, I was at the pharmacy picking up her medicine. By the time I returned, the house was full of relatives, and Victor already had the lawyer on speakerphone. Nobody hugged me. Nobody asked if I was okay. They looked at me like I was a problem they had been waiting to remove. At the funeral, I sat in the second row because Marlene said the front row was for immediate family. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell everyone that I was the one who held Grandma's hand during nightmares, the one who cooked when she could not eat, the one who knew her favorite hymn. But grief has a way of stealing your voice, so I sat there quietly while my family erased me in public. 3 days after the funeral, Victor called what he described as a family meeting. And even before I stepped through the front door of my grandmother's house, I knew something was wrong, because the air didn't feel like grief anymore. It felt like urgency, like something had already been decided without me, and when I walked into the living room, the first thing I noticed wasn't the people, it was the emptiness. The walls where Grandma's paintings had hung for years were bare, leaving faint outlines behind like ghosts of what used to matter. The cabinet where she kept her porcelain collection stood half open and nearly empty, and the soft, familiar warmth that used to live in that room had been replaced by something cold, something transactional, something final. And then I saw them, Victor, standing near the fireplace, holding a folder, Marlene sitting upright on the couch with her back perfectly straight, and my grandmother's pearl necklace resting around her neck like it belonged there. Rachel perched near the window, holding Grandma's teacup carefully in both hands as if it were something valuable she had just acquired, not something filled with years of quiet memories, and Dean leaning against the wall scrolling on his phone, barely looking up as I entered. And for a moment I just stood there, taking it all in. Because it didn't feel like a family gathering, it felt like the aftermath of something already taken, already divided, already lost. Victor didn't waste time. He didn't ask me to sit, didn't ask how I was holding up, didn't acknowledge the fact that 3 days earlier I had buried the only person in that house who had ever truly seen me. Instead, he opened the folder and began speaking in that same calm, measured tone he used when he wanted everything to sound official, final, unquestionable. He said the will was simple, that Grandma had made her decisions clearly, that everything had already been outlined and verified, and as he spoke, he listed each item like he was reading a report: the house, the land, the remaining accounts, everything allocated between him, Marlene, Rachel, and Dean, each name spoken with quiet satisfaction, each word reinforcing something I hadn't yet allowed myself to fully believe. And when he finished, he closed the folder slowly and looked at me as if expecting me to accept it without question, without reaction, without even asking to see what he had just read aloud. But I did ask. I asked to see the document. And the moment I said it, something shifted in his expression, not surprise, not irritation, but something closer to anticipation, like he had been waiting for me to say those exact words, like this moment had already been rehearsed in his mind. He smiled, slow and controlled, and said, "You do not have legal standing." And that phrase didn't just hurt, it cut. It cut deeper than anything else that had been said in that room, because it reduced everything I had been to something meaningless. It turned 22 years of living in that house, of caring for my grandmother, of loving her in the quiet, ordinary ways that never needed recognition, into something that could be dismissed with two cold words: legal standing. As if love could be measured by paperwork, as if presence could be erased by a signature. I tried to speak again, but before I could, he continued, saying that Grandma had left a written note, that she had requested I be removed from the property immediately, that she had expressed concern about my behavior, about my emotional state, and when he said the words, emotionally unstable, something inside me froze, because I knew instantly that it was a lie, not a suspicion, not a doubt, but a certainty. I had been there with her. I had seen her hands tremble when she tried to hold a pen. I had watched her struggle to write even the simplest sentences. And more than that, I knew her heart. I knew the way she spoke about me when no one else was listening. I knew the quiet strength in her voice when she said my name, and there was no version of her, no moment, no circumstance, where she would have written something like that about me. But in that room, truth didn't matter. Only what could be proven did. And I had nothing. No document. No witness. No voice that anyone there was willing to hear. When I refused to leave, when I stood there and said quietly that I wasn't going anywhere, Victor's expression hardened, not dramatically, but enough for me to see that the patience he had been pretending to have was gone. He said if I didn't leave willingly, he would call the police, that he would report me for trespassing, and the word trespassing echoed in my mind in a way that felt almost unreal, because how do you trespass in a place where you grew up? How do you become an outsider in a home that once held every version of you? And before I could respond, Marlene leaned closer, her voice low, careful, almost gentle, and said, "Don't make a scene, Clara. Think of your grandmother's dignity." And that sentence, even now, still burns in a way I can't fully describe, because they had already taken everything that gave her dignity. They had stripped the house of her presence, her belongings, her memory, and yet they stood there, pretending that they were protecting something they had already destroyed. But because I understood something in that moment that I hadn't been willing to accept before, I wasn't going to win anything in that room, so I turned. And I walked upstairs, each step slower than the last, not because I didn't know what I was doing, but because I did, because every step was a step away from something I had thought would always be mine in some quiet, unspoken way. And when I reached my room, I closed the door gently behind me, not out of habit, but out of instinct, because some part of me still needed to believe that I had control over something, even if it was just the way a door closed. The room looked the same, exactly the same. The bed neatly made, the curtains drawn halfway, the faint scent of lavender still lingering in the air from the sachets Grandma used to place in my drawers. And for a moment I stood there, not moving, just looking. Because leaving doesn't happen all at once, it happens in layers, in seconds where your body hesitates even when your mind has already decided. And then I moved, slowly at first, opening the closet, pulling out a suitcase, placing it on the bed, and beginning to pack. I didn't take much. Not because I didn't have things, but because none of it felt like it belonged to me anymore. I folded a few clothes, placed them inside, added a small photograph of Grandma and me taken years earlier, one where she was laughing, her eyes bright, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder, and then I opened the bottom drawer and took out her recipe notebook, worn at the edges, filled with handwritten notes and small stains from years of use. And that was the only thing I held for a moment longer than everything else, because it wasn't just a book, it was a piece of her, something real, something they hadn't thought to take yet. When I zipped the suitcase closed, I paused, not because I was unsure, but because I understood what that moment meant. This wasn't just leaving a house. This was leaving a version of my life behind. One that was never going to come back the way I wanted it to. I picked up the suitcase and walked downstairs. No one stopped me. No one spoke. They watched, quietly, as I moved through the hallway, past the living room, past the kitchen, past everything that had once felt like home. And when I reached the door, I didn't turn around, because turning around would have meant hoping for something that wasn't going to happen. So I opened the door, and I stepped outside. It was raining. Not lightly. Not gently. But heavily, steadily, the kind of rain that soaks through everything within minutes. And as I walked down the steps, the water hit my face, my clothes, my hair. But I didn't stop, I didn't run, I didn't look back, I just kept walking. Because sometimes the only way to leave is to keep moving forward until the place behind you no longer feels like something you can return to. That night, I slept in my car behind a closed grocery store. The parking lot was empty. The lights flickered occasionally, casting uneven shadows across the asphalt. And I sat there for a long time before I lay down, my suitcase beside me, the windows fogged slightly from my breath, and the silence felt different there. Not heavy like it had been in the house, but open, uncertain, almost endless, and that was when the realization came. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, like something settling into place. A family secret doesn't destroy you the moment it exists. It destroys you the longer you keep asking the wrong people to tell the truth. And in that car, in that quiet, empty space, I understood something that would change everything that came after. I wasn't going to beg anymore. Not for answers. Not for validation. Not for a place in a family that had already decided I didn't belong. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't come from them. It comes from the moment you stop needing them to give it to you. I moved to Seabrook with $200 and no plan except survival. I cleaned hotel rooms in the morning, worked at a diner at night, and studied legal administration online whenever my eyes could stay open. I wanted to understand the language Victor used to erase me. Wills, trusts, probate, guardianship, forged signatures, undue influence. Every new word felt like a small weapon placed back into my hands. For years, I did not contact them. but I watched from a distance. Victor sold one apartment building, then another. Dean started a failed investment company. Rachel opened a luxury boutique that closed within 8 months. Marlene kept hosting charity events while quietly borrowing money. They were living off Grandma's legacy, but they were not building anything. They were consuming it. Then one evening, while I was working late at a small law office, an elderly attorney named Mr. Whitmore came in carrying a sealed storage box. He had known my grandmother years before. When he saw my name on my desk, he froze. "Clara Bennett?" he asked. My whole body went cold. He told me Grandma had visited him privately 2 months before her death. She had been afraid. She believed someone in the family was pressuring her to change her estate plan. Mr. Whitmore said she left a sealed instruction packet with him, but after her death, Victor's lawyer claimed a newer will existed, so the packet was never opened. Then he placed the box in front of me. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside was a letter in Grandma's handwriting, a video flash drive, and a notarized trust document naming me the primary beneficiary of the Bennett house and the remaining farmland. I could not breathe. The truth had been waiting in a box for 7 years. The flash drive changed everything, but not in the way people imagine when they hear that phrase. It didn't explode into instant justice or dramatic confrontation. It unfolded slowly, painfully, like a truth that had been buried so deep it had to fight its way back to the surface piece by piece. And the moment I pressed play, sitting alone in that small office with the lights dim and my hands trembling more than I wanted to admit, I saw her, my grandmother, Eleanor Bennett, sitting in her study wearing her blue cardigan, the same one I used to fold carefully after laundry because she said it made her feel put together even on days she was too tired to stand for long. And for a second, I couldn't breathe, because it didn't feel like a recording. It felt like she was right there again, like time had folded in on itself just long enough to give me something I didn't know I needed. Her presence, her voice, her truth. Her voice was weaker than I remembered, softer, like every word took effort, but her eyes were exactly the same, sharp, steady, unafraid. The eyes of someone who had already made peace with what was coming but refused to let the truth disappear with her. And when she spoke, there was no hesitation, no confusion, no uncertainty. She said Victor had been pressuring her, that documents had been taken from her desk, that things she had signed had been replaced, that she no longer trusted the papers in her own house, and hearing it in her own voice, broke something inside me that I didn't realize had been holding on all those years. Because for 7 years, I had lived with a question I couldn't answer. What if they were telling the truth? What if I had misunderstood her? What if I wasn't as important to her as I believed? That doubt, that quiet, persistent doubt, had followed me everywhere, into every decision, every relationship, every moment where I questioned whether I deserved to be where I was. And cruel families know exactly what they're doing when they leave you with that kind of uncertainty, because it doesn't just take away your past, it weakens your future, it makes you hesitate, makes you second-guess yourself, makes you smaller than you were ever meant to be. And then she said it. Clear, firm, unmistakable. Clara is not a guest in this family, Clara is my heart. I had to pause the video. Not because I didn't want to hear the rest, but because I couldn't see through the tears. They came suddenly, violently, like something that had been held back for too long, finally breaking through, and I pressed my hand against my mouth to keep the sound from escaping, because even in that empty room, some part of me still felt like I wasn't allowed to cry too loudly, and that realization alone made the moment even heavier. Because I had spent years learning to be quiet. Even in my pain. Even in my truth. And hearing her say that, hearing her claim me so completely, so openly, it didn't just bring comfort, it brought clarity. It erased 7 years of doubt in a single sentence. It reminded me that I hadn't imagined her love, that I hadn't exaggerated it, that it was real, solid, undeniable, and that what they took from me wasn't just property, it was the memory of being loved without condition. That is what cruel families do. They don't just take what you can see, they take what you feel. They rewrite your past until you don't trust your own memories anymore. They turn love into something you question. And that is a kind of theft no court can fully measure. When I pressed play again, her voice continued, slower now, but still steady. She said if anyone was watching that recording, it meant something had gone wrong. It meant her instructions had been ignored or manipulated, and she made it clear, painfully clear, that the house, the land, and everything she had worked for was meant to protect me, not exclude me, and by the time the video ended, I wasn't shaking anymore. I was still, focused, clear in a way I had never been before. Because for the first time, I didn't just believe I had been wronged. I could prove it. Mr. Whitmore didn't rush anything. He didn't make promises or dramatic statements. He simply nodded once, closed the laptop, and said, "We move carefully." And that was exactly what we did. The investigation didn't start with confrontation. It started with records. Quiet requests. Small details. Things that didn't seem important on their own but began to form a pattern when placed together, and at first, nothing was obvious, just inconsistencies, dates that didn't align, signatures that looked slightly different from one page to another, witness names that appeared but couldn't be immediately verified. And if I had been the person I was 7 years ago, I might have missed it. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had spent years learning how systems work, how truth hides, how people manipulate structures to protect themselves. And I paid attention. Every detail, every line, every small irregularity. The will Victor presented had been dated 2 weeks before my grandmother's death, but the signature didn't match her medical records from that time. Her hand had been too unsteady, too weak, and the witness statements listed two individuals who, according to official records, had not even been in the state on that day. And the notary stamp, the one that was supposed to validate everything, led to a name that initially seemed legitimate, until we dug deeper and found the truth. The woman had died months before the document was supposedly notarized. That was the moment everything shifted. Not emotionally, but legally, because up until then, it was a dispute. After that, it became fraud. And fraud leaves traces. Bank transfers began to surface, small amounts at first, then larger ones, moving between accounts connected to Victor and individuals who had no clear reason to be involved. Emails recovered from an old laptop showed conversations about finalizing documents, about timing, about making sure everything is signed before she changes her mind, and piece by piece, the story they had built started to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. Victor hadn't just taken advantage of the situation. He had planned it. Carefully, deliberately. And that realization didn't make me angry the way I thought it would. It made me quiet, because anger is loud. But betrayal like that? It settles deeper. It changes how you see everything. When the court hearing was finally scheduled, the silence from my family broke almost immediately. The calls started coming in. First Rachel. Her voice shaky, emotional, asking if we could talk, if there had been a misunderstanding, if things had gotten out of control, and for a moment, just a brief moment, I heard the version of her I grew up with, the cousin who used to sit with me on the floor and share snacks when no one else was looking, but that moment passed quickly, because underneath her words was something else. Fear. Then Dean called. He didn't cry. He didn't try to explain. He just said, "I didn't know it would go this far." But he never said he didn't know it was happening, and that difference mattered. Marlene's call came last. Calm, controlled, carefully worded. She said, "Your grandmother would hate seeing us divided like this." And I remember standing by the window, looking out at a street that had nothing to do with any of this, and feeling something settle inside me, something steady, something unshakable, and when I answered her, my voice didn't rise, it didn't break. It didn't carry the weight of the years they had taken from me. It was simple, clear. "No," I said. "She would hate seeing you lie." Silence followed. Long, heavy. But this time, it didn't belong to me. It belonged to them. Because the truth had finally found its way back. And there was nothing left they could do to stop it. If you've listened this far, I want you to be honest with yourself for a moment. Not with me. Not with anyone else. Just with yourself. Would you forgive people who didn't just take from you, but tried to erase you completely? Who made you question your own memories, your own worth, your own place in a family that should have protected you? Would you let them back into your life just because they finally got caught, or would you do what I did? And choose something different? Not revenge, not anger, but truth. Because sometimes, truth is the only thing that can rebuild what was meant to be destroyed. The hearing took place on a cold Monday morning. Victor arrived in a navy suit, still trying to look important. Marlene wore Grandma's pearls again, and that almost broke my calm. Rachel would not look at me. Dean kept rubbing his hands together like a boy caught stealing. Their lawyer argued that Grandma was confused, that I manipulated her, that I came back only for money. Then Mr. Whitmore played the video. The courtroom went silent. Grandma's voice filled the room. She named every pressure tactic, every missing document, every fear. Then she looked into the camera and said, "If Clara is watching this, my dear girl, do not let them make you small." I watched Victor's face collapse. Not all at once. Slowly. Like a house losing its foundation. The judge ordered a full review, froze the remaining assets, and referred the forged documents for investigation. The Bennett house and farmland were returned to the trust. I became the legal owner. But here's the plot twist my relatives never expected. I did not move into the house. I did not sell it to become rich. I turned it into the Eleanor House, a safe transitional home for young women leaving abusive or controlling families. The farmland became a community garden. Grandma's bedroom became a counseling room. Her kitchen became a place where people learned to cook, heal, and begin again. When Marlene heard the news, she said I was humiliating the family name. I told her, no, I am finally giving it meaning. Years later, people still ask if I hate them. The honest answer is no. Hate would keep me tied to them, and I fought too hard to become free. Victor lost his license. Marlene disappeared from her charity circles. Rachel moved away. Dean started over quietly, and he is the only one who ever sent a real apology without asking for anything. I did not become powerful because I wanted revenge. I became whole because I stopped asking broken people to give me justice. Justice came when I stood up, opened the box, told the truth, and used what was stolen from me to help someone else. This emotional family drama taught me that inheritance is not only land, houses, or money. Sometimes the greatest inheritance is courage. Sometimes it is one woman's love surviving every lie told against it. And sometimes a family secret story becomes the seed of healing for strangers who need a place to begin again. If this story touched your heart, please leave your honest thoughts below. Some parts of this story were shaped with AI technology to make the storytelling clearer and more emotional, so your sincere feedback helps me improve the next family drama story for this channel. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for giving your love to this YouTube family drama channel. May we all learn to return to our roots, plant better seeds, share what is good, and become the kind of family someone else once prayed for. I didn't celebrate when the judge finalized the decision. I didn't smile, I didn't feel victorious, and I didn't walk out of that courtroom like someone who had just won. Because the truth is, there was nothing to win. You don't win when your own family becomes the reason you have to fight in the first place. You don't win when the people who were supposed to protect you are the ones you have to prove yourself against. You simply survive. And sometimes, surviving quietly becomes the strongest form of power you will ever know. After the hearing ended, I stayed seated for a few minutes while everyone else stood up. Papers shuffled, chairs moved, voices filled the room again, but it all sounded distant, like I was underwater. Victor didn't look at me when he walked past. Not even once. Marlene tried to say something, but her voice broke before the words could form. Rachel wiped her eyes, though I couldn't tell if it was guilt or fear. And Dean, he paused. Just for a second. Long enough for me to see something real in his expression, regret. But he didn't speak. And maybe that was the most honest thing he could do. I walked out of that courtroom alone, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. But freedom doesn't come wrapped in comfort. It comes with silence, with space. With the kind of stillness that forces you to face everything you've been running from. That night, I sat in my small apartment in Seabrook, holding Grandma's letter again. I had read it dozens of times already, but somehow, each time it felt different. Clara, she had written, if you are reading this, it means they tried to take from you what was never theirs. Do not fight them with anger. Fight them with truth. And when the truth is finally seen, choose kindness, not because they deserve it, but because you do. I remember staring at that sentence for a long time. Because kindness was the one thing I didn't think I had left. If you're still listening right now, I want to ask you something honestly. Have you ever been hurt so deeply that even doing the right thing feels impossible? If you have, just type "I understand" in the comments. Sometimes knowing someone else has felt that pain too changes everything. The next morning, I drove back to Ashford Heights. Not as the girl who was thrown out in the rain, but as the woman who came back with the truth in her hands. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The paint had faded. The garden Grandma used to care for was overgrown, like nobody had touched it in years. It hurt more than I expected. Not because of the damage, but because it showed me how little they ever truly valued what she built. I didn't knock. I used the key, the same key they told me I had no right to keep. The door opened with a slow creak, and the smell hit me instantly. Dust, stale air, and something else, something empty. This house used to feel warm, alive, full of quiet love. Now it felt like a shell. Like something important had been stripped away. I walked slowly through each room. The living room where Grandma used to sit every evening. The kitchen where she taught me how to cook. The hallway where she used to call my name when dinner was ready. And then I stopped at the doorway of her bedroom. I didn't go in right away. Because some memories you don't walk into, you prepare yourself for them. When I finally stepped inside, everything looked untouched. The bed was still neatly made. Her glasses rested on the nightstand. And for a second, I forgot everything that had happened. For 1 second, it felt like she was still here. And that's when it broke me. Not in a loud way, not in a dramatic way, just quietly. I sat on the edge of her bed and let the tears fall. Because no matter how strong you become, grief doesn't disappear. It just waits. I stayed there for a long time before I made the decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to keep this house for myself, and I wasn't going to sell it. Because this house was never meant to be a symbol of wealth. It was meant to be a place of safety. And somewhere along the way, that meaning was lost. So I chose to bring it back. The process wasn't easy. Turning the Bennett house into a nonprofit home meant paperwork, inspections, funding plans, legal restructuring. There were days I felt overwhelmed. Days I questioned if I was making the right choice. But every time I doubted myself, I remembered Grandma's words, "Choose kindness." Not because it's easy, but because it's right. Months passed, and slowly, the house changed. The walls were repainted, the garden came back to life. The rooms were filled again not with greed, but with stories. Young women arrived one by one. Some with nothing. Some with fear in their eyes. Some who had been told, just like me, that they didn't belong anywhere. And every time I opened that door for someone new, I saw myself, not the broken version, but the beginning. That's when I realized something powerful. The greatest revenge is not destruction, it's transformation. Victor lost everything he tried to control. Marlene lost the image she spent her life protecting. Rachel lost the illusion she believed in. But me? I found something they never had: purpose. And years later, when people ask me about my family, I don't tell them the story of betrayal first. I tell them about my grandmother, because she is the reason I survived. She is the reason I became who I am, and she is the reason this story didn't end in pain. It ended in something better. If you've listened all the way to this point, I want to say something from the bottom of my heart. And thank you, truly. Because stories like this are not just stories. They are reflections of real emotions, real struggles, real choices. Some parts of this story are inspired by real-life experiences, and some parts are enhanced with AI storytelling to bring deeper emotion and clarity. So if something touched you, or if there's anything you feel could be better, I genuinely want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. And maybe, just maybe, your words will help shape the next story into something even more meaningful. Once again, thank you for being here. Take care of yourself, value the people who truly love you, and never forget, sometimes walking away from the wrong people is the first step toward finding the right life. I'll see you in the next story. I didn't expect to see him again. Not like that. not standing across the street from the Bennett house on a quiet afternoon, wearing a jacket that looked 2 sizes too big, his shoulders slightly bent, like the weight of the past had finally settled into his bones. Victor. For a moment, I didn't move. I just stood there on the porch, holding a box of donated supplies, watching him from a distance the way you watch something you never thought would come back into your life. He didn't call my name. He didn't step forward. He just stood there, waiting. And somehow, that silence said more than anything he could have spoken. I placed the box down slowly beside the door and walked toward him, each step steady, controlled. But inside, something was shifting. Not anger, not fear. Something quieter. Something I didn't recognize right away. When I stopped a few feet away, he finally looked up. His eyes were different. Not proud, not cold, not calculating, just tired. Clara, he said, his voice low, almost uncertain, like he wasn't sure he had the right to say my name anymore. I didn't respond immediately. I let the moment breathe. Because for years, I had imagined this encounter in 100 different ways. In some versions, I shouted. In others, I turned away. In a few, I said everything I had never been able to say before, but standing there in real life, none of those versions felt right. What do you want? I asked quietly. Not harsh, not soft, just clear. He nodded slowly, like he had expected that question. I heard about the house, he said. What you turned it into. His eyes moved past me, toward the building behind me, where soft laughter echoed from inside, where life had returned in a way none of them had ever allowed it to before. You kept her spirit alive, he added. That caught me off guard. Because out of everything I thought he would say, that wasn't one of them. I folded my arms gently, more to steady myself than to create distance. Is that why you're here? I asked. He shook his head. No. There was a pause, a long one. Then he took a breath, like he was preparing to say something that had been sitting inside him for years. I came to tell you, his voice faltered for just a second, that you were right. Silence, the kind that presses against your chest. I was wrong, he continued, his eyes dropping to the ground. About you. About your grandmother. About everything. And there it was, the apology I had imagined 1,000 times. But now that it was in front of me, it didn't feel the way I thought it would. There was no rush of satisfaction, no sense of victory, just stillness. Because sometimes, the apology comes too late to change anything. And sometimes, you've already healed without it. I don't need you to forgive me, he added quickly, like he could feel the distance between us. I just needed to say it. I studied him for a moment. This man who once stood so tall in my life, who held power over everything I thought I was worth, now looked like someone trying to understand where it all went wrong. And for the first time, I saw him clearly. Not as a villain, not as a monster, but as a playdate person who made choices. Wrong ones. Painful ones. But choices, nonetheless. Why now? I asked. He let out a slow breath. Because I lost everything, he said, and when you lose everything, you start to see what actually mattered. His voice was quiet, no excuses, no justifications, just truth. I thought success meant control, he continued. I thought if I kept everything in my hands, I'd never fall. He shook his head slightly, but all I did was destroy the one thing that was real. I didn't interrupt, because I knew exactly what he meant. Family. Not the version built on power or money, but the version built on love. The one he chose to ignore, the one he chose to break. I went back to the house, he said suddenly. That made my chest tighten. Slightly. After everything, he added. Before they tore it down. He looked up at me again. It was empty, he said, but I could still feel her there. Grandma. Of course he could. Do you know what I realized? He asked softly. I didn't answer. I never understood her, he said. Not really. His voice carried something heavier now. She wasn't protecting you from us, he paused. She was protecting us from becoming what we became. That hit deeper than anything else he had said. Because it was true. Grandma wasn't trying to choose between us. She was trying to hold the family together in the only way she knew how. And when she couldn't anymore, everything fell apart. I looked away for a second, taking in a slow breath. Because no matter how strong you become, there are still moments that find the part of you that remembers. I can't change what I did, Victor said. No, I replied calmly. You can't. He nodded. I know. Another silence, but this one felt different, not heavy, not painful, just honest. I don't expect anything from you, he said. I just wanted you to know. I see it now. I met his eyes again, and for the first time, there was nothing left between us to fight. No anger, no resentment. No need to prove anything, because I had already built a life beyond that. I hope you do, I said quietly, and I meant it. Not for him, but for me. Because holding on to anger would only tie me back to a version of myself I had already outgrown. He gave a small nod. Then, slowly, he turned and walked away. No dramatic ending. No final words. Just footsteps fading into distance, and somehow, that felt right. I stood there for a long time after he left. Not thinking, not analyzing, just feeling the quiet. Then I turned back toward the house, toward the voices inside, toward the life I had built from something that once tried to break me, and I walked back in. Inside, one of the girls ran up to me, holding a small notebook. Clara, she said excitedly, I finished the recipe you showed me. I smiled. A real one. Let me see, I said. She handed it over proudly, and as I looked down at her handwriting, I felt something settle deep inside my chest. Peace. Not because everything turned out perfectly, but because I chose what to do with what happened. That's the part nobody tells you. You don't control how people treat you. You don't control the pain they cause. But you do control what you become after it, and that changes everything. If you've stayed with me all the way to the end of this story, I want to ask you something, not as a storyteller, but as someone who has lived it. What would you choose? If you had the chance to walk away from everything that hurt you, would you carry the pain with you, or would you turn it into something better? Because sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is not to hold on, but to let go and build something new. This story is not about revenge. It's not about winning. It's about choosing yourself without becoming the person who hurt you. Some parts of this story were shaped with the support of AI to bring deeper emotion and clarity, and I truly value your thoughts. If something touched you, or if there's a part you feel could be even stronger, please leave your honest comments below. Your voice helps me tell better, more meaningful stories in the future. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for staying until the very end. Take care of your heart, protect your peace, and never forget, family is not just who you are born to. It's who you choose to love, who chooses to stand beside you, and who helps you become better, not smaller. I'll see you in the next story.